Dota 2 is a game where survival matters more than anything else. Across its storied history, the heroes who thrived were those who could escape death, slip away from danger and return to fight another day. But few heroes embody this principle quite like the one who literally cannot be caught. A slippery criminal from the darkest depths who turns vulnerability into power and transforms every hunt into a deadly game of cat and mouse. Today we're going to explore the competitive history of Slark at our most important tournaments, the International. So how good was the Nightcrawler? In the Dark Reef prison there are no guards. There are no walls that can contain its inmates. Instead, the prison itself is the punishment, an underwater abyss where the most dangerous criminals are thrown and forgotten. Here, in absolute darkness, the inmates prey upon each other in an endless cycle of violence. But one prisoner was different. Slark was small, quick and clever. Where others fought with brute strength, he survived through cunning and speed. For years he endured, learning the patterns of predators, adapting to every threat, until finally he found what no one else had ever discovered: a way out. Through a combination of patience, stealth and ruthless opportunism, Slark escaped the Dark Reef. And now he stalks the world above, forever changed by his time in the abyss, forever hunting. Slark was implemented into Dota 2 on the 8th of November 2012, several months after the International 2. He was a melee agility hero with fairly unusual attributes. His starting strength and intelligence were quite low, making him fragile and mana-starved early on, but his agility gain was spectacular, sitting at 2.8 per level, which was well above average. His movement speed was also a respectable 305, making him naturally mobile. Slark's first ability was Dark Pact. Dark Pact had Slark channel for 1.5 seconds, after which he released a burst of damage in a small area around himself, hitting once immediately and then pulsing again, every half second for 2.5 seconds. Each pulse dealt damage to enemies and to Slark himself, but most importantly, each pulse also dispelled debuffs from Slark. This meant that Dark Pact could remove stuns, silences and slows, making Slark incredibly difficult to lock down. The self-damage was considerable, but for a hero designed around escaping bad situations, the dispel was invaluable. The delay before it activated meant Slark had to predict incoming disables, but skilled players could time it to purge off nearly anything. Slark's second ability was Pounce. Pounce had Slark leap forward a fixed distance of 700 units. Any enemy unit he collided with during the leap was leashed, unable to move more than 325 units away from the point of impact for 3.5 seconds. The leash couldn't be dispelled by most means and pierced spell immunity, making it a reliable disable. Pounce was Slark's primary gap closer and escape tool. It could be used to jump over impassable terrain, to chase down fleeing enemies, or to create distance from pursuers. The leash was particularly effective against melee heroes, who suddenly found themselves unable to reach Slark or would escape his attacks. Slark's third ability was Essence Shift, and this was where things got interesting. Essence Shift was a passive ability that triggered whenever Slark attacked an enemy hero. Each attack permanently stole 1 point of each attribute from the target for 15 seconds. Then after those 15 seconds, the stolen attribute was returned to the enemy, but Slark kept his bonus permanently, stacking with each attack. This meant that extended fights made Slark progressively more powerful while weakening his opponents. Every attack gave Slark +1 to all his stats, which meant more damage, more attack speed, more armor, more health and more mana, while his target lost all of those things. Essence Shift turned Slark into a scaling monster in long engagements. Slark's ultimate was Shadow Dance. Shadow Dance had both a passive and active component. The passive caused Slark to become invisible if he remained hidden from enemy vision for 2 seconds. While invisible, Slark gained a massive movement speed bonus and incredible health regeneration, allowing him to heal from near death remarkably quickly. The active component triggered Shadow Dance manually, making Slark invisible and untargetable for 4 seconds while providing the same movement speed and healing bonuses, even if he was in full vision of his enemies. When activated, Shadow Dance made Slark immune to all targeted spells and attacks for its duration. It didn't prevent him from being hit by area of effect abilities, but it made him incredibly slippery and difficult to pin down. The combination of invisibility, health regeneration and untargetability meant that Slark could repeatedly dive into fights, escape when things got dangerous, heal up, and then return to the battle. From the very beginning, Slark was clearly designed as a carry. His abilities all supported extended combat and hit-and-run tactics. Dog Pact let him ignore disables, Pounce gave him mobility, Essence Shift made him scale infinitely, and Shadow Dance kept him alive when he should have died. But despite this obvious design intent, Slark didn't appear at the International 3, not even once. He wasn't picked, he wasn't banned, he simply didn't exist in the competitive meta. The reasons for this were complicated. The International 3 was defined by Alliance and their patient defensive farming style. Games were slow, methodical and centered around building massive late-game advantages. Slark didn't fit into this environment. He needed to fight early and often to start stacking Essence Shift, but early fighting wasn't rewarding in the economy of TI3. Hero kills were worth less than farming, and towers provided the real gold. Slark also struggled in lane. His low starting health and mana made him vulnerable to harassment, and he couldn't jungle efficiently like other carries could. His strength came from extended fights, but in an era where most supports couldn't afford items and carries barely had any defensive tools, fights were often decided by who could burst their opponent down first. Slark's durability came from healing after fights, not during them, and that made him less effective than more straightforward carries. But there was another issue. Slark required a very specific style of play. He needed to constantly be on the edge of danger, dancing in and out of fights, accumulating stat steal, and then using his ultimate to reset. This was not how carries were played in 2013. Carries were protected, they were given space to farm, and then they were expected to show up to team fights with overwhelming power. Slark couldn't do that. He needed to be active early, which meant he needed farm priority, but he also couldn't be the sole damage dealer on his team, because his impact was delayed by the ramp-up time of Essence Shift. Essentially, Slark was a carry that didn't play like a carry, and Dota 2 wasn't ready for that yet. After the International 3, Slark received several adjustments. Dark Pact had its cooldown reduced from 9 seconds to 6, which was a substantial buff as it made the ability much more spammable. Pounce had its cooldown reduced as well, going from 20 seconds to 16. Essence Shift was changed to now steal attributes for 120 seconds, instead of permanently keeping them for 15. This was actually a significant nerf, as it meant Slark lost his permanent stat gain. The idea was to make him stronger in the immediate fight but weaker when it came to long-term scaling. Shadow Dance also saw adjustments. Its cooldown was reduced and the passive component now triggered faster, allowing Slark to start regenerating more quickly. At the International 4, Slark made his competitive debut. He was picked exactly once by Evil Geniuses in their match against CIS game during the group stage. They played him as a safe lane carry, giving him the protected farming space that carries traditionally received. The game went well. EG won convincingly and Slark performed adequately. He wasn't spectacular, but he wasn't terrible either. He farmed his items, got some kills in team fights and contributed to his team's victory, but after that single game he vanished again. No other team picked him and no one banned him. The death ball meta that dominated TI4 was possibly the worst environment Slark could have asked for. Teams were grouping up at 10 minutes and pushing down towers in rapid succession. Fights were short, brutal and often over before Slark could accumulate enough Essence Shift stacks to matter. Slark needed time and space and TI4 gave him neither. Following TI4, patch 6.82 was released and everything changed. 6.82 fundamentally reworked Dota 2's economy, reducing the value of towers and increasing the value of hero kills. It also introduced comeback mechanics that made kills on farmed heroes incredibly valuable. This shifted the meta away from early pushing and towards more extended mid-game fighting. This was perfect for Slark. Hero kills were now worth fighting for, and longer skirmishes gave him time to stack Essence Shift. On top of this, 6.82 and subsequent patches introduced significantly more gold and experience to the map. Jungle camps respawned more frequently. New items were added and support started having actual inventories. 6.84 was particularly important for Slark, as it introduced several new items that synergized perfectly with his kit, most notably Silver Edge. Silver Edge was an upgrade to Shadow Blade that provided a powerful active effect. When used, it made its user invisible and caused their next attack to break the target's passive abilities for 5 seconds. It also reduced their damage output. For a hero like Slark, who already loved building Shadow Blade for the mobility and surprise potential, Silver Edge was a dream come true. It gave him even more burst damage, a powerful debuff, and it built naturally into his preferred playstyle. Other new items like Glimmer Cape and Solar Crest also changed the support landscape, making it easier for teams to protect their cores or to enable aggressive plays. At the International 5, Slark saw moderate play. He was contested in 24 games, being picked 14 times with a solid 64% win rate. This was a significant increase from his single appearance at TI4, and it showed that teams were starting to understand how to use him. Slark was played almost exclusively as a safe lane carry, and his most common item build was Power Treads into Shadow Blade, then either Silver Edge or Skull Basher depending on what was needed. Some players preferred Blink Dagger for the instant repositioning, while others committed fully to the Shadow Blade invisibility style. Slark's greatest strength at TI5 was his ability to punish overextension. If an enemy hero was caught out of position, Slark could pounce on them, and with the help of his team quickly stack enough Essence Shift to make escape impossible. The leash from Pounce was particularly devastating in this regard, as it prevented Blink Daggers from being used, which was the primary escape tool for most heroes. Dark Pact also made Slark a nightmare to gank properly. If opponents wanted to kill him, they needed to chain their disables perfectly, because any gap in the stun duration would give Slark an opportunity to purge with Dark Pact and then pounce away. Teams started learning to bait out Dark Pact by throwing a relatively unimportant disable first and then following up with their real lockdown. But this required coordination, and even then Shadow Dance could save Slark if things went poorly. But Slark still had weaknesses. He was extremely mana dependent early game, and if he got pressured in lane, he struggled to recover. He also needed at least 1 or 2 items before he could really fight effectively. A Slark with only brown boots and a poor man's shield was largely irrelevant, but a Slark with Shadow Blade and treads was a serious threat. This made him a somewhat risky pick, because if the enemy team could shut him down early, he took a long time to come back into the game. The team that got the most success out of Slark at TI5 was CDEC Gaming. They picked him 3 times and won all 3 games. They played him as a traditional safe lane carry, but they gave him more space than most teams would usually provide. CDEC's aggressive playstyle created opportunities for Slark to farm safely while the enemy team was busy defending towers, and this allowed him to reach his critical item timings without too much trouble. However, CDEC didn't pick Slark in the later rounds of the main event. They opted for other carries that they felt were more reliable, and so Slark's tournament ended relatively early. His highest placement came from CDEC Gaming, who reached the grand finals, earning $1,184,158 as the second place team. Between TI5 and TI6, Slark received a variety of changes. Patch 7.0's Hour was released, which completely reworked the map, added talents to every hero, and changed many fundamental aspects of the game. Slark's first talent tree was fairly straightforward. At level 10, he could choose between +8 strength or +125 damage. At level 15, between +10 agility or +40 dark pack damage. At level 20, between +80 pounds distance or +30 attack speed. And at level 25, between 120 essence shift duration or 1 second pounds cooldown. These talents were solid but not game-defining. The +120 essence shift duration at level 25 was particularly notable, as it made Slark's stat stealing much more oppressive in extended games. Slark himself received several buffs. Dark Pact had its cooldown reduced again and its damage increased slightly. Pounce had its leash duration increased to 3.5 seconds. And Shadow Dance gained additional movement speed on its active component. These were all quality of life improvements that made Slark feel smoother to play. At the International 6, Slark saw increased popularity, being contested in 37 games with a respectable 54% win rate. He was still primarily a safe lane carry, but a few teams experimented with playing him in the mid lane, where his high mobility and ability to control runes made him effective against certain matchups. The mid lane Slark was particularly good at shutting down enemy mids, who relied on positioning or needed to farm creeps close to their tower, because Pounce could leap up the high ground and leash them in place. Slark's item build evolved slightly. Shadowblade into Silver Edge remained the most popular choice, but Echo Saber became a new early game option. Echo Saber was an item that caused its user's next attack to hit twice in quick succession, which synergized well with Essence Shift, as it meant Slark could get 2 stacks with a single attack animation. This accelerated his ramp-up time significantly and made him more threatening in the mid-game. Slark's greatest success at TI6 came from Digital Chaos, who used him multiple times in the later stages of the tournament. DC played Slark with a very aggressive, tempo-oriented style. They picked heroes like Axe, Batraider and Disruptor alongside him, creating constant pressure on the map and forcing fights where Slark could shine. This aggressive pace gave Slark exactly what he needed. Frequent skirmishes where he could accumulate stats and then use Shadow Dance to heal up between encounters. One of the standout performances came during DC vs TNC Pro Team in the lower bracket, where W33 played Slark in a game that went to nearly 70 minutes. In this match, Slark demonstrated his late-game potential, repeatedly diving into fights, stealing massive amounts of stats, and then disappearing with a Shadow Dance only to return moments later fully healed. It was this kind of performance that reminded everyone why Slark was so dangerous when given space to operate. Digital Chaos ended up placing second in the tournament, earning 3,407 Thornhonows in 2026, and Slark played a notable role in several of their victories. However, he still wasn't considered a top-tier carry. He was good, he was effective, but he wasn't dominant. Teams respected him enough to ban him occasionally, but he wasn't the kind of hero that defined the meta. Following TI16, Slark continued to receive adjustments. His talents were reworked several times, with various bonuses being increased or replaced entirely. Notably, his level 25 talent options became +2 seconds Shadow Dance duration or 1.5 seconds Pounce cooldown, both of which were extremely powerful. The 1.5 second Pounce cooldown in particular turned Slark into an absolute menace in the late game, as he could use it almost constantly for mobility and lockdown. Slark also gained an Aghanim's Scepter upgrade that allowed him to cast Pounce on an allied hero, causing him to leap to them and apply a leash around that location. This was intended to give Slark a new utility option, but in practice it was rarely purchased, as Slark had better items to spend his gold on, and the leash effect wasn't strong enough to justify the cost. At the International 7, Slark had one of his strongest showings yet, being contested in 52 games with a 58% win rate. This was a significant jump from previous years, and it showed that teams were finally fully embracing what Slark could do. The meta at TI7 was much more conducive to his playstyle. Dual lanes were becoming more common, which meant Slark could actually lane with a support who could help him secure farm and get kills. Pounce was particularly effective in dual lanes because it gave his support partner an easy setup for their own abilities. Slark's item build became more diverse. Echo Saber into Silver Edge was common, but some players preferred Blink Dagger into Abyssal Blade for more reliable lockdown. Skull, Basher and later Abyssal Blade synergized excellently with Essence Shift because the more stats Slark stole, the more attack speed he had, and the more chances he got to proc the bash. This created a snowball effect where successful fights made subsequent fights even easier. The team that found the most success with Slark at TI7 was Team Liquid. They played him several times throughout the tournament, and GH in particular had a memorable performance on the hero in their match against LGD Forever Young in the lower bracket. Liquid used Slark as part of a mobile, aggressive draft that constantly pressured objectives and forced LFY into uncomfortable fights. Slark excelled in this environment because LFY couldn't afford to turtle and farm. They had to contest objectives, which meant they had to fight Slark on his terms. Team Liquid went on to win the International 7, earning $10,862,683, and while Slark wasn't their most picked hero, he was an important part of their arsenal, demonstrating his viability at the highest level of play. After TI7, Slark received one of his most significant changes yet. Patch 7.07 reworked Shadow Dance completely. The passive component, which caused Slark to become invisible when out of vision, was removed. Instead, Shadow Dance now simply provided a massive health regeneration bonus whenever Slark wasn't visible to the enemy team. The active component remained mostly the same, providing 4 seconds of untargetability, but it no longer granted invisibility. This was a substantial nerf to Slark's survivability. The old Shadow Dance passive had been incredibly powerful because it allowed Slark to heal to full health in only a few seconds, just by hiding in the trees or fog of war. But now he needed to actually be invisible, either from Shadowblade or from other sources, for the passive to trigger. This made Shadowblade even more mandatory in his build, and it meant that detection was much more effective against him. To compensate, Slark received several buffs. Dark Pact had its damage increased, Pounce gained additional leash duration, and Essence Shift started stealing even more stats. But despite these compensation buffs, Slark's win rate dropped significantly. He was still playable, but he felt much weaker than before. At the International 8, Slark saw reduced play, being contested in only 23 games with a disappointing 40% win rate. The Shadow Dance rework had hurt him significantly, and teams weren't sure how to adjust. Teams still tried to make him work, particularly OG, who experimented with Slark in several games, but the results were mediocre. Slark struggled to find his place in a meta that was increasingly favoring tanky strength cores, who could fight early and often without needing items. One issue was that Slark's weak laning stage became much more punishable at TI8. Dual lanes were the standard, and if Slark's lane went poorly, he couldn't recover by jungling like some other carries could. He needed to fight to get Essence Shift stacks, but if he was behind, he couldn't fight effectively. It was a vicious cycle that often left Slark feeling irrelevant. OG did pick Slark in one of their lower bracket games, but it wasn't particularly successful. They eventually moved away from the hero in favor of other carries. Slark's highest placement at TI8 came from OG, who won the entire tournament, earning $11,734 but Slark's contribution to that victory was minimal at best. He was picked in the group stage and early main event, but by the time OG reached the grand finals, Slark had been abandoned. Following TI8, Valve clearly recognized that Slark needed help. Patch 7.20 brought massive changes to the game, including significant Slark buffs. Shadow Dance was reworked again. Now the passive provided health regeneration whenever Slark was not visible to enemies, or when he was affected by his own Shadow Dance active. This was still weaker than the original version, but it was much better than the TI8 iteration. Slark also gained increased agility gain, going from 2.8 to 3.0 per level, which improved his damage and armor scaling. Slark's talents were also reworked yet again, with his level 10 talent now offering plus 20 attack speed or pulverate strength, his level 15 offering plus 30 dark pack damage or plus 1 second pounce leash, and his level 20 offering plus 2 seconds. Shadow Dance duration or plus 75 pounds distance. His level 25 remained the same, with the incredibly powerful 1.5 second pounds cooldown option. But the biggest change for Slark came with patch 7.23, which introduced Aghanim's Shard, a consumable upgrade that gave every hero an additional ability or enhancement. Slark's Shard upgrade allowed Shadow Dance to be cast on an allied hero, applying the same untargetability effect to them for 3 seconds. This was an interesting utility option, but it wasn't particularly impactful, as Slark's gold was better spent on items that made him more dangerous. At the International 9, Slark saw moderate play, being picked in 19 games with a 47% win rate. He was better than his TI8 performance, but still not at the level he'd been at during TI5 through TI7. The meta at TI9 was extremely fast-paced, with teams constantly fighting over objectives and map control. Slark fit reasonably well into this environment, but he faced stiff competition from other agility carries like Gyrocopter, Phantom Assassin and Morphlin, who all offered more immediate impact. Slark's primary issue was that he required specific conditions to excel. He needed extended fights to stack Essence Shift, he needed enemies to be out of position for pounds to be effective, and he needed to avoid being completely locked down by chain disables. When everything went right, Slark wasn't terrifying, but when conditions weren't perfect, he felt underwhelming. One interesting development at TA9 was that some teams started picking Slark as a mid laner rather than a safe lane carry. This allowed him to reach his level 6 power spike faster, which made his Shadow Dance available for early skirmishes. It also put him in a solo lane where he could get more experience and reach his important talent levels quicker. However, mid-Slark required favorable matchups, and many teams opted to ban him rather than deal with the threat. Slark's highest placement at TA9 came from Team Liquid, who used him in several of their matches. Liquid played Slark as a tempo-controlling carry who farmed aggressively, but also joined fights early. They paired him with heroes like Earthshaker and Konka, who could set up easy pounce targets. Liquid ended up placing 7th, earning 804 SU 460, which, while respectable, wasn't a particularly high placement for a hero competing at this level. The period between TA9 and TA10 saw Dota 2 undergo massive changes. The map was expanded significantly, more neutral camps were added, and neutral items were introduced as a mechanic. These neutral items dropped randomly from jungle creeps and provided free bonus stats and abilities to heroes. Slark benefited from several neutral items, particularly those that gave him additional mobility or survivability. Items like spider legs, which provided movement speed and the ability to walk over terrain, were excellent on Slark, as they gave him even more ways to escape or chase. Slark also received several direct buffs during this period. Dark Pact had its cooldown reduced to 5 seconds at all levels, making it incredibly spammable. Pounce cooldown was reduced to 12 seconds, and Essence Shift had its attributes still increased. This made Slark much more dangerous in extended fights, as he could now stack stats faster and use his abilities more frequently. But perhaps the most significant change came with patch 7.28, when Slark received his Aghanim's Scepter rework. The new scepter gave Slark the ability Depth Shroud, which created a cloud of darkness at a target location for 6 seconds. Allies within the cloud were hidden from enemy vision and gained the passive health regeneration from Shadow Dance. This was an incredibly powerful team fight tool, as it essentially gave Slark's entire team invisibility and healing in a large area. At the International 10, which was delayed to 2021 due to the pandemic, Slark saw significant play, being contested in 63 games with a 54% win rate. This was a strong performance, and it showed that the buffs and item change had successfully brought Slark back into the meta. The Aghanim's Scepter upgrade in particular made him much more valuable to his team, as Depth Shroud could swing team fights dramatically. The meta at TA10 was defined by long games and heavy emphasis on fighting over Roshan. The second Roshan kill was incredibly valuable as it dropped an Aghanim's shard, and teams built their entire strategies around securing it. Slark fit well into this environment because extended games gave him time to scale with Essence Shift, and his mobility made him effective at contesting Roshan. Slark's item build at TI-10 typically followed the pattern of Power Treads into Echo Saber into Silver Edge, then either Aghanim's Scepter or Abyssal Blade depending on team needs. Some players preferred to rush Scepter immediately after Silver Edge to get access to Depth Shroud as early as possible, while others prioritized damage items and picked up Scepter later. One standout performance came from Team Spirit, who used Slark multiple times in the later rounds of the tournament. Spirit played Slark with an aggressive, tempo-oriented style, constantly pressuring objectives and forcing fights in favorable positions. Depth Shroud was crucial in many of their victories, as it allowed their entire team to reset during fights, which prolonged engagements and gave Slark more time to accumulate stats. Team Spirit went on to win the International 10, earning 18,200 $1,300, and Slark was picked in several of their most important matches, demonstrating his value at the highest level. This was Slark's most successful tournament showing since TE5, and it proved that when played correctly he could be a tournament-winning hero. Following TI10, Slark received minor adjustments. Essence Shift had its stat steal duration reduced slightly, and Shadow Dance had its cooldown increased. These were modest nerfs aimed at bringing his win rate down without gutting the hero. The Akhanim's Scepter also saw changes, with Depth Shroud having its cooldown increased and duration reduced. At the International 11, Slark was contested in 48 games with a 50% win rate, which was perfectly average. The meta at TI11 was dominated by Ray Pack, a powerful neutral item that summoned a totem providing auras and damage reduction. Slark struggled somewhat in this meta because Ray Pack made it very difficult for single-target carries to get kills. The damage reduction meant Slark needed more time to kill targets, which gave enemies more opportunities to disable him or escape. However, Slark was still viable, and several teams found success with him. The key was pairing him with heroes who could destroy the Ray Pack totem quickly, like Naga Siren or Phantom Lancer, or picking him into drafts that didn't have strong Ray Pack users. Slark's mobility and Dispel also made him effective against many of the popular heroes at TI11, like Marseille and Mars, who relied on positioning and couldn't easily lock him down. Slark's item build evolved to include more defensive options. Black King Bar became much more common as teams learned that if they could lock Slark down during Shadow Dance's downtime, they could kill him before he healed up. Skade also saw increased popularity, as it provided good stats and a slow that helped Slark stick to targets. The team that found the most success with Slark at TI11 was Thunder Predator, who picked him in several of their matches. Thunder Predator played an aggressive South American style that emphasized constant fighting, and Slark fit perfectly into this approach. However, they were eventually eliminated in the lower bracket, and Slark's highest placement came from their upper bracket run. Thunder Predator finished in 9th to 12th place, earning 804 solo 460. Between TI11 and TI12, Slark received another set of changes. Patch 7.33 massively expanded the Dota 2 map, adding new areas, camps and objectives. This gave Slark more space to farm and more opportunities to find solo kills on enemies who were isolated. The larger map also made Shadow Dance and Depth Shroud more valuable, as vision became harder to maintain. Slark's talents were reworked once more, with several becoming much more impactful. His level 20 talent option was changed to 2-second Dark Pact cooldown, which at max level meant Dark Pact had only a 3-second cooldown. This made Slark absurdly difficult to control, as he could dispel disables almost instantly. At the International 12, Slark was contested in 41 games with a 46% win rate, which was slightly below average. The meta at TI12 was extremely fast-paced, with teams fighting over Tormentors and Wisdom runes constantly. Slark struggled in this environment because these objectives required group team fighting, and Slark excelled more at picking off isolated targets. However, Slark still saw play from several top teams who valued his unique strengths. Tundra Esports in particular used Slark in multiple matches, playing him as a mobile split-pushing carry who could pressure side lanes while his team controlled the map. Slark's ability to escape ganks made him excellent at this role, as he could push deep into enemy territory and then pounce or shadow dance away when enemies came to stop him. Slark's item build at TI12 saw the return of Diffusal Blade as a core item. Diffusal provided agility and a mana burn active that could drain enemy mana quickly. When combined with Essence Shift, this created a powerful combo, where Slark would leap on a target, burn their mana with Diffusal, and then beat them down while they couldn't cast spells. This was particularly effective against heroes who relied on abilities to escape. Slark's highest placement at TI12 came from Tundra Esports, who won the entire tournament, earning 8,518,122 Tululalis. However, Slark was not a major part of their victory and was only picked in a handful of games during the group stage and early main event. By the time Tundra reached the grand finals, they had moved on to other carries. From his introduction in 2012 to the present day, Slark has always been a hero defined by his unique survivability and scaling potential. He was one of the first carries designed around constant aggression and hit-and-run tactics, at a time when most carries were passive farmers. While he struggled to find his place in the early years, as the meta evolved to favor more active playstyles, Slark became increasingly viable. His peak came during the International 5-7, when the meta perfectly aligned with his strengths. During this period, Slark was a legitimate top-tier carry who could take over games. But as power creep accelerated and new heroes were added, Slark found himself under pressure. He required specific conditions to excel, and when those conditions weren't met, he felt underwhelming. Despite this, Slark remained a consistent presence and broke in competitive Dota, never dominating but never disappearing either. He was picked in every international from TI4 onward, and while his win rates fluctuated, he always found teams willing to play him. Slark's total prize earnings across all internationals are difficult to calculate precisely, since he was rarely the defining hero of any team's success, but he contributed to multiple championship runs, most notably with Team Spirit at TI10 and Team Liquid at TI7. In the pantheon of Dota 2 carries, Slark occupies a unique position. He is not the strongest, the most popular or the most decorated, but he is one of the most distinctive. A hero whose entire identity revolves around being uncatchable, a slippery elusive hunter who turns every gank into a mistake. Slark may never have been the best carry in the game, but for those who mastered him, he was unmatched. Thank you very much for watching the story of Slark. I hope you enjoyed learning about this fascinating hero who has remained viable through so many different eras of Dota, despite never quite reaching the pinnacle of competitive dominance. Slark represents something important in Dota, the idea that with enough skill and the right circumstances, any hero can be deadly. Next up, we have another hero who defined their era in their own unique way, so I'll see you then.